Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, Cattle Mutilation. The phenomenon of cattle mutilation stands as one of the most chilling, bizarre, and persistently unexplained aspects of modern anomaly research. Unlike subjective lights in the sky or fleeting UFO sightings, cattle mutilations leave behind tangible, physical evidence, precise surgical incisions, missing tissue, and an utter lack of conventional explanation. That has baffled ranchers, veterinarians, and law enforcement for decades. An in-depth examination of the cattle mutilation phenomenon reveals several key dimensions. The anatomy of a mutilation, key characteristics. Beginning in earnest across the American Midwest and Western states in the early 1970s, though with roots stretching back to 1967 in Colorado, the famous Snippy the horse case. Ranchers began finding livestock dead under highly anomalous circumstances. These cases share a chillingly consistent forensic profile. Surgical precision. Soft tissues, most frequently the lips, tongue, eyes, ears, jaw flesh, anus, and genitalia, are excised with absolute surgical precision, often appearing cauterized or cleanly cut through bone and cartilage without leaving tool marks. Total absence of blood. In almost every documented case, investigators note a complete lack of blood at the scene and inside the carcass. There is typically no blood on the surrounding grass, indicating that the animal was drained entirely of blood prior to or immediately during the excision. The predator paradox: scavengers, coyotes, flies, and blowflies will refuse to touch or even approach the carcasses. Animals that would normally feed on a dead cow leave the remains entirely untouched for weeks, allowing them to mummify in the sun rather than decompose. Zero tracks. Despite occurring in muddy fields, dusty pastures, or remote rangelands, there are almost never human footprints, vehicle tire tracks, or signs of a struggle surrounding the carcass. The historical wave of the 1970s and FBI involvement. The phenomenon reached crisis levels between 1973 and 1979, particularly in states like Colorado, New Mexico, Nebraska, and Montana, where thousands of cattle were found mutilated. Economic impact on panic. Ranchers faced devastating financial losses, and local law enforcement was overwhelmed. Governors and U.S. senators, most notably New Mexico Senator Joseph Montoya, pressured federal agencies to step in. Operation Animal Mutilation, 1979. The FBI launched a formal multi-state investigation known as Operation Animal Mutilation, headquartered in Albuquerque, New Mexico. While the FBI examined dozens of cases to determine if a cult or clandestine human conspiracy was terrorizing livestock, the official conclusion of the federal probe was ultimately inconclusive, pointing out that natural predation failed to explain the anomalies, yet no definitive human or extraterrestrial culprit could be proven. Competing hypotheses. How do researchers explain it? Over the decades, investigators, scientists, and theorists have proposed several competing models to explain the mutilations. The extraterrestrial non-human hypothesis. For ufologists, cattle mutilations are inextricably linked to UFO sightings. Witnesses in mutilation areas frequently report seeing silent, glowing orange or white orbs, black unmarked helicopters, or triangular craft hovering over pastures around the time of the incidents. The theory posits that non-human intelligence uses cattle as biological monitors, harvesting genetic material, endocrine system tissues, and blood to test for environmental toxins, radioactive fallout, or to study mammalian biology. The secret government clandestine operations theory. Another prominent theory suggests that mutilations are the work of clandestine military or intelligence agencies, conducting secret biowarfare research, monitoring the food chain for pesticide radiation accumulation, or testing advanced surgical lasers. Proponents argue that the use of silent, unmarked helicopters and high-tech equipment points to black-budget programs operating outside public oversight. Natural predators and biological decay. Mainstream scientists and skeptics argue that the phenomenon is largely a combination of natural predation, blowflies, and scavenger activity, accelerated by environmental desiccation, mummification. They suggest that scavengers naturally clean soft, moist areas first, eyes, tongue, genitals, and that blood can pool internally or drain into the ground, creating the illusion of a clean removal. However, even mainstream veterinarians have historically struggled to explain how natural predators could execute laser-like incisions or why carrion-eating animals refuse to touch the meat. Cultural legacy and modern persistence. Cattle mutilations remain a dark pillar of high strangeness. They bridge the gap between physical reality and the unknown, forcing observers to confront a terrifying possibility. That an intelligence, whether terrestrial or cosmic, operates with total impunity across our rural landscapes, treating livestock as scientific specimens. While the massive, hysterical waves of the 1970s have quieted, sporadic reports continue to surface globally to this day, serving as a grim reminder that the edges of our consensus reality conceal phenomena far beyond conventional science. Is cattle mutilation still happening today? Yes, but it is much quieter. While the mass hysteria and heavy media spotlight of the 1970s and 1980s have faded, isolated reports of unexplained livestock mutilations continue to surface across rural parts of the United States, such as Oregon, Colorado, and New Mexico, as well as internationally in countries like Argentina and Brazil. However, cultural attention has shifted. In the modern era, high strangeness discussions focus more heavily on government-acknowledged UAP disclosure, military whistleblowers, and transmedium craft, USOs, rather than livestock. When a mutilation case does happen today, it typically circulates locally or through independent researcher networks, like Linda Moulton House Earth Files, rather than dominating national primetime news. Where was the starting point and how did it spread? While historical anomalies resembling mutilations date back centuries, with sporadic reports tracked as far back as 1606 in England, the modern phenomenon exploded in the United States during the late 1960s and 1970s. The spark, 1967. The modern narrative widely points to September 1967 near Alamosa, Colorado, involving a horse named Snippy, legally named Lady. Snippy was found dead with the flesh stripped cleanly from around its head and neck, and the case gained intense local and national press after local sheriff deputies and owners blamed a UFO. The spread, 1973 to 1975 waves. The phenomenon snowballed across the American Midwest and West. In 1973, a massive wave hit Kansas and Nebraska. By 1975, the panic spread heavily into Colorado, where nearly 200 cases were reported in a single year, Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. Media amplification. Local newspaper reports were picked up by wire services, fueling a national panic. By the late 1970s, it reached federal attention, prompting U.S. Senator Floyd Haskell to ask the FBI to launch an official investigation. Linda Moulton House 1980 documentary A Strange Harvest cemented the phenomenon into the national consciousness, linking it permanently to UFO lore. Given how famous cattle mutilations were, I was stunned when the organizer of our experiencer support group briefly mentioned hearing reports of cat mutilations during a meeting. My immediate thought was, what? Now cats are being mutilated by whatever is doing this? Weren't cattle enough? Are domestic pets affected? The factual reality of animal mutilation reports. While large livestock such as cattle, bulls, and horses remain the primary focus of classic high-strangeness mutilation lore, largely due to open-range mysteries and the economic value of the carcasses, law enforcement and animal control agencies do receive similar reports involving domestic pets and wildlife. However, these cases are categorized and investigated through entirely terrestrial frameworks. Pet mutilations, cats, and dogs. Local animal control officers, humane societies, and police departments occasionally handle reports of domestic cats or dogs found deceased with clean wounds or missing body parts such as ears, tails, or internal organs, often with minimal blood at the scene. Rather than being linked to high strangeness or extraterrestrial phenomena, official investigations approach these incidents through two documented real-world explanations. Many suspected pet mutilation panics have been scientifically proven to be the result of ordinary scavenging. For example, during the widely publicized Croydon cat killer investigation in England between 2014 and 2018, hundreds of cats were reported dead with clean decapitations or missing limbs. Comprehensive veterinary pathology studies conducted by the Royal Veterinary College and the Metropolitan Police concluded there was no human, serial, or anomalous involvement. Instead, the cats had been struck by vehicles or died of natural causes, after which urban wildlife, specifically red foxes and badgers, scavenged the remains. Foxes naturally target soft tissues, ears, and organs first, and their bite patterns can mimic clean, surgical cuts to an untrained observer. Similar findings are regularly noted by animal control agencies across the United States. When law enforcement confirms that a pet's injuries are man-made and not the result of vehicle impacts or animal predation, criminal investigators treat the incident strictly as a matter of severe animal cruelty. Criminology and federal law enforcement frameworks recognize that intentional targeted abuse or mutilation of domestic animals by individuals is thoroughly studied as a terrestrial behavioral red flag, completely separate from the UFO or high-strangeness debate. While historical livestock mutilations became heavily intertwined with UFO and anomalous folklore through investigations, like those of Linda Moulton Howe, science and law enforcement firmly separate domestic pet incidents. Household pet cases are universally attributed by experts either to natural wildlife scavenging and predation or to terrestrial criminal acts. Are there reports of pig mutilations? Have pig mutilations ever occurred? While pigs are genetically close to humans, sharing such high anatomical compatibility that porcine heart valves and organs are successfully transplanted into humans, why have they been largely overlooked in high-strangeness lore compared to cattle, cats, and other animals? The reality is that pig and swine mutilations do exist in the historical record of high-strangeness, though they are far less common in public lore than cattle cases. During the peak livestock mutilation panics of the 1970s and 1980s across the American Midwest and South America, investigators occasionally documented hogs found dead under the same anomalous conditions. Clean soft tissue excisions, missing organs, and a reported absence of blood. Yet, they never captured the cultural spotlight that cows did. Why cattle over pigs? Logistics and lore. When examining why cattle became the centerpiece of mutilation lore, while agricultural pigs did not, several practical factors stand out. Cattle spend their lives roaming massive, isolated pastures and open ranges where they are unobserved for days, providing an ideal window for unexplained events. In contrast, commercial pigs are almost universally raised in high-density confinement barns or fenced lots with constant monitoring by farmers. A prized ranch cow or bull represents a major financial loss, sparking immediate outrage and media attention. Cattle carry deep historical roots in mythology and agricultural folklore, making them a natural focal point when mysterious phenomena entered rural communities. The genetic paradox, pigs and human biology. Your observation regarding genetics is striking. Pigs are biologically and anatomically much closer to humans than cattle are. Porcine heart valves have been used in human cardiac surgery for decades, and recent medical milestones have successfully achieved xenotransplantation, transplanting genetically modified pig hearts and kidneys into human patients. If an intelligence or covert program were harvesting biological materials or genetic analogs for human application, pigs would theoretically be a far closer biochemical match than cows. Yet, traditional UFO and mutilation law rarely frames pigs in this medical context, leaving the focus on cattle tied instead to open-range geography, folklore, and historical momentum rather than molecular biology. While classic large-scale waves of cattle mutilations were most heavily concentrated in the American Midwest, Great Plains, and Southwest such as Colorado, New Mexico, Kansas, and Nebraska, unexplained animal deaths and anomalous mutilation reports have occasionally surfaced in Washington State context. In broader high-strangeness and ufology databases, occasional reports from rural parts of Washington State, such as eastern Washington, or the foothills of the Cascades mirror national patterns. These reports have historically included not just cattle, but wild game like elk and deer found dead with localized tissue removals. When Washington State law enforcement or local county sheriff departments, such as in rural eastern or southern counties, receive these reports, they are typically approached through standard investigative channels, evaluating them for ordinary wildlife predation, scavenger behavior by coyotes, cougars, or birds of prey, or environmental factors rather than classifying them as official anomalous events. How Washington fits the broader UFO and high-strangeness map. Even though the heavy concentration of classic 1970s cattle mutilation case files centered on ranching states, Washington State occupies a completely unique place in American high-strangeness history for other foundational reasons. As established, Washington hosted the 1947 Kenneth Arnold sighting near Mount Rainier, which gave birth to the term flying saucer and the famous Maury Island incident near Puget Sound. With high-security military corridors like Annaus Whidbey Island, Naval Base Kitsap, and historical sites like Hanford sharing the Washington landscape, the Pacific Northwest has long been a focal point for overlapping narratives involving military airspace, classified aerospace testing, and civilian reports of anomalous phenomena. While Washington state ranchers have occasionally reported mysterious livestock deaths over the decades, the state's primary contribution to high strangeness remains rooted in aerial UAP sightings, military encounters, and the 1947 origins of modern ufology rather than heavy waves of livestock mutilations. Are there reports of human mutilations? While livestock mutilations are well documented in fringe lore, do alleged human mutilations exist? Are humans targeted for organism or reproductive organ research by non-human intelligences? Yes, alleged human mutilations do exist within fringe ufology and urban legends, though they are exceptionally rare, heavily contested, and often intertwined with dark conspiracy theories. The lore of human mutilations. In the subculture of anomalous research and internet folklore, stories occasionally surface claiming that humans have occasionally been subjected to the same surgical style, bloodless tissue extraction, attributed to cattle mutilations. The Lovette-Cunningham Incident, 1956. Anatomy of an Urban Legend. The story of Air Force Sergeant Jonathan P. Lovette is arguably the most notorious and gruesome tale in the dark lore of alleged human mutilations. It sits at the intersection of Cold War military paranoia, UFO folklore, and modern internet mythology. According to the persistent ufology legend, the incident unfolded in March 1956, sometimes cited in 1954 variants, at the White Sands Proving Ground, now White Sands Missile Range, in New Mexico. Major William Cunningham and Sergeant Jonathan P. Lovette were reportedly tracking a fallen UFO or missile debris in the desert. According to the tale, Cunningham watched in horror as a disc-shaped craft hovered overhead, extended a flexible cable or beam, wrapped it around Lovette, and dragged him up into the sky. A frantic search ensued. Hours later, Cunningham and recovery teams allegedly discovered Lovette's body miles away in the desert. The lore claims that Lovette's body exhibited the classic surgical hallmarks of livestock mutilations. He had been dead for only a short time, but his tongue, eyes, and genitalia had been excised with extreme precision, leaving no blood behind, and his internal organs had reportedly been removed through minimal incisions. The mythical source, Project Grudge Report Number 13. The primary vehicle for the story was not an official government declassification, but rather an unverified, legendary document known as Project Grudge Report Number 13. Project Grudge was a real, short-lived U.S. Air Force UFO investigation that ran from 1949 to 1951, succeeding Project Sign and preceding Project Blue Book. Project Grudge only released 14 technical reports and a general summary, none of which contained any mention of human mutilations, let alone a report number 13 inches detailing the horrific death of an Air Force sergeant. The specific report number 13 inches document is widely recognized by researchers as a piece of folklore fabrication or an early internet-era hoax, frequently circulating on early BBS boards and message forums in the 1990s. Both mainstream historians, military archivists, and serious UFO researchers, including those skeptical of government cover-ups, universally dismiss the Lovette-Cunningham incident as an urban legend or creepypasta prototype. Lack of paper trail, no military records, personnel files, or death certificates for an Air Force sergeant named Jonathan P. Lovette matched the timeline or circumstances of the legend. Long before modern creepypastas on platforms like Reddit, ufology had a thriving underground of photocopied zines and rumor networks. The Lovette-Cunningham tale acts as a psychological projection, taking the real, eerie mystery of 1970s cattle mutilations and pushing the narrative to its ultimate, terrifying human extreme. The Guaraparanga case, Brazil, 1988. Anatomy of a controversial discovery. The 1988 case from the Guaraparanga Reservoir in São Paulo, Brazil, stands alongside the Lovette-Cunningham legend as one of the most frequently cited touchstones in international ufology regarding alleged human mutilation. Unlike American tales rooted largely in unverified military rumors, the Guaraparanga incident is grounded in a real, highly disturbing police file, making it a focal point for intense debate between anomalous researchers and forensic pathologists. On September 29, 1988, the mutilated body of an unidentified man was discovered near the shores of the Guaraparanga Reservoir, a major water supply and recreation area on the southern outskirts of São Paulo. When authorities arrived, they found a corpse that exhibited extreme post-mortem damage. Proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, most notably Brazilian ufologists and investigators like J. Jeverd, seized upon photographs and official police descriptions of the body, pointing out chilling parallels to classic cattle mutilations. Ufological literature claimed the body showed circular, cleanly excised wounds where soft tissues, lips, eyes, ears, and internal organs had been removed. Crucially, the reports emphasized an apparent lack of bleeding at the wound sites and argued that the precision of the cuts defied standard terrestrial postmortem decomposition or scavenger activity. While ufologists framed the case as a potential human encounter with non-human intelligence, local authorities, police investigators, and forensic pathologists approached the gruesome scene through strictly terrestrial lenses. Official Brazilian police and medical examiner records evaluated the body as the victim of a violent crime. Forensic analysis indicated that the victim had been subjected to severe trauma before or around the time of death. Pathologists explained the missing soft tissue and clean-looking margins, not as laser scalpel precision, but as a combination of advanced decomposition, tropical insect activity, such as ants and blowflies feeding on exposed mucous membranes and soft tissue, and aquatic scavenging by fish or turtles common to the reservoir. Soft tissues around the face, eyes, and groin are prime targets for scavenging fauna, which often leave distinct circular feeding patterns that can mimic surgical incisions to an untrained eye. Given the socioeconomic context of urban São Paulo in the late 1980s, law enforcement viewed the homicide through the lens of local criminal activity, gang retaliation, or drug-related violence, where brutal post-mortem mutilation is occasionally used as a deterrent. Why the Guaraparanga case persists. The Guaraparanga case remains a classic study in how an ambiguous forensic investigation can be reinterpreted through the lens of high-strangeness. For mainstream forensic science, it is a tragic, horrific homicide compounded by aggressive local scavenging. For the international ufology community, however, the disturbing nature of the wounds and the eerie alignment with livestock mutilation reports turned it into a permanent cornerstone of the human harvest mythos, illustrating the deep chasm between how science investigates a crime scene and how fringe researchers interpret the unknown. Are humans targets for organ or reproductive research? Within mainstream science, biology, and law enforcement, there is zero physical or empirical evidence that humans or animals are being harvested or mutilated by non-human intelligence. However, looking strictly at the narrative architecture of the abduction and experiencer phenomenon, the focus on human reproductive systems is a central motif. Since the Betty and Barney Hill case and subsequent accounts, popularized by researchers like Bud Hopkins and David M. Jacobs, human experiences frequently report being subjected to medical or reproductive examinations, such as the extraction of genetic material, ova, or sperm. Skeptics and psychologists explain these recurring narrative tropes through sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, false memory creation, and the deep-seated human anxiety surrounding bodily autonomy and violation. Meanwhile, believers and researchers of high-strangeness view it through the lens of a covert, biological monitoring or hybridization program. Ultimately, while livestock mutilations left behind physical carcasses that fuel decades of debate, alleged human mutilations remain entirely in the realm of unverified urban legend, whereas human reproductive research remains strictly confined to the psychological framework of the abduction mythos. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the Archive Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact, The Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute hit of real-life experiences, perfect for your daily plunge into consciousness exploration. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.